The card machine beeped twice, and the billionaire's smile slipped like a mask. 12-year-old Lily pushed a small roll of coins across the counter as if it were a lifeline. He folded a scrap of paper into her palm. R. Whitmore, a number, a promise that smelled of late-night suits. Cameras and smiles waited. Someone had already written the lines they wanted her to say. When her mother's breath began to fail, that paper felt heavier than any coin. No one guessed then that one small kindness would pull a thread able to unravel an empire. Before we go any further, if this is your first time watching one of our videos, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us till the very end. And if the story moves you, drop your thoughts in the comments and share it with a friend. Now let's begin. Rain had found the city in a thin, persistent way, slicking the pavements, turning neon into long, trembling strokes on the windows of closed shops. The grocery at the corner smelled of citrus and detergent, a small, bright island against the oil-dark alleys and the glass towers far down the avenue where lights blinked like a different life. Inside, the fluorescent hum was steady and merciless. It made everything smaller and more honest. Shelves leaned with familiar needs: tinned tomatoes, cheap coffee, a stack of day-old bread wrapped in paper. A clock on the wall held onto its minute hand like a promise that the night would pass. I watch Lily Evans from the moment she pushes the bell on the door. There is something about the way she wraps her scarf, too thin against the cold, that tells me she learns to make warmth from little things. She is 12, but her hands are older than her face, quick at folding coins into a neat, stubborn roll. Her hair is tied back with a faded ribbon that once was red. Her eyes are the kind that try not to ask too many questions because questions can be heavy and expensive. She moves as if she is carefully mapping how the world will let her pass without breaking anything it thinks it needs. Lily came in with a list she had written in pencil on the back of a leaflet for a soup kitchen 2 streets away. At the top, in a careful child's hand, she wrote, "For Mama." Below that, bread, milk, paracetamol tea. Her shoulders were squared, not from habit, but from purpose. She knows the price of each little thing as though she has counted it with prayer. The bell rings again, and the bell rings again. Customers who are strangers to each other but familiar with hardship, nodding like old friends. The cashier, a man named Paul, who has a tattoo of a ship on his forearm, recognizes Lily and lets the corners of his mouth soften. He knows the name on the list before she even speaks it. Outside, a black car with chrome too bright for the street pulls up. You can tell a certain kind of person by the patience of their driver and the way umbrellas open for them like small black clouds. Robert Whitmore gets out, tall, silver-haired, wearing a coat that seems to know how much it is worth. He moves with a financial certainty, the kind that makes money feel like gravity pulling everything toward him. He steps into the grocery like a summer guest entering a winter house. People notice, of course. There's a small charge in the air, like the hush before an announcement. I try to hold my breath for both of them, the girl who counts pennies and the man who signs checks with his name like a stamp. The store becomes a room where 2 lives orbit the same light for a few minutes. Lily waits in line with her small, careful basket. Robert is quick, laughing politely with the cashier about wine he will never need to think twice about. The cashier rings up his purchases with mechanical care as if counting to 100. His eyes flick to Lily and back. Outside, rain makes a soft sound against the car roof, indifferent and patient. Lily sets her items down: a small loaf, a bottle of milk, a strip of paracetamol. Her coin roll comes out like a secret. Each coin is a small sun. She smooths them as if arranging little planets. She knows the exact total because she counted it twice yesterday in the dimness of their one-room flat. Her thumb grazes a pebble of gum in her pocket. She does not take it out. There is dignity in small refusals, a quiet kind of hunger that does not demand pity. Robert's card fails. Nobody plans for that sound to be an event. The card machine beeps like a bird startled in the night, and the register clicks with a bureaucrat's cruelty. His laugh comes out short. People in line glance. Whispers make themselves into a thread and stitch the moment into everyone's memory. He checks his designer wallet, a small frown between his brows that looks like an unfamiliar thing on a man used to that kind of control. There's a pause. A voice asks politely, then not politely, if he has another card. A flustered explanation tries to make itself respectable technical issue, bank error, something that wants to be small and disappear. I know what the air does when the rich are suddenly human. It sharpens. It looks for a seam. It begins to hunt for how the imbalance might be fixed aloud. Robert reaches into his pocket. There is plastic, there is authority, and then a brief, strange helplessness. He smiles, and the smile trembles. Somewhere in his mind, a ledger is flipping, and each page shows a woman on a couch and a child in the corner of memory with hands that need less and more at once. Lily feels the shift before she hears it. She has learned the language of silence in lines and bus stops. When the beep comes, she glances up from her coins and sees the man with the silver hair. For a slice of a second their eyes meet, and something passes, an acknowledgement, a small collision of worlds. She returns to her counting. The night outside keeps raining, and inside the store an ordinary hour begins to lean toward an edge. The foundation of what will come is laid without fanfare. A man's card that will not grant him ease, a girl who keeps her dignity like a coin in her palm, and a cashier who holds both of their names like careful change. The machine made a small, brutal sound when it refused Robert Whitmore. It was only a beep, 2 short, clean notes, but in that cramped grocery it rang like a verdict. Conversations dropped a degree. The fluorescent light hummed as if listening harder. Robert's hand hovered above the counter for a breath too long. His face stilled into the polite, practiced softness of a man used to doors opening for him. He offered an apology that wanted to sound like an excuse. Strange. Must be the bank. The cashier, Paul, kept his smile stitched to his mouth. Paul's fingers hesitated over the till. Around them, customers made the small body language adjustments that communities of strangers use to avoid discomfort, shifting bags, pretending to check labels. Lily felt the pull before she named it. She had learned, in the blunt school of hunger, to notice when the world tilted. The tilt had a smell, a mix of nervous cologne and rain. She kept her coins folded on the palm of her hand as if they were a tiny animal. The coin roll felt like a promise she had given herself the night before when she had divided every last cent between bread and Mama's pills. The promise had a name and a due date. "What if I?" she began, and the sentence surprised her more than anyone. It came soft, close to a whisper. She pushed the coin roll across the counter toward Robert's small pile of groceries. The motion was as simple as offering a cup to someone who drops theirs. But in that moment, something larger shifted. A child making a radical choice in a room that had no space for heroics. Robert blinked. He collected himself with the quick arithmetic of someone who has always expected numbers to behave. He reached out, intending to refuse. Pride is a blunt instrument. It can cut and heal at once. "I can manage," he said, but it came out thin. Paul cleared his throat. "No, no, ma'am. He's the customer." He looked at Robert with a new, hectic sympathy. Robert smiled, the kind of smile that can resettle a room, the smile of a man who knows his reputation is a currency. For a second I watched how power tries to make things tidy. An embarrassed man, a generous child, a cashier who wants to patch both worlds back together. Lily did not stand during the ceremony. She wanted the notes on her counter to buy the paracetamol that would make her mother's breathing easier the next morning. She wanted, also, to move out of the place where she and her mother kept each other alive with the blunt tools of survival. That the two wants should collide in the person of a man like Robert was almost a cruelty of the city. "Take it," she said, and the softness of her voice carried a certainty that had no business being there. The coin roll clicked like confidence. Robert's hand closed around the money. For a moment his fingers were against hers, a contact as quick and ordinary as a handshake, and yet heavy with class and consequence. His mouth shaped the words, "Thank you," simple and shocked. He fumbled for something to say that would not make him smaller. You shouldn't. He tried, but the sentence stumbled into gratitude. He slipped something into her palm then, almost before she realized what it was. A scrap of paper, folded so small it looked like a secret. Her thumb brushed the ink. On the other side, a name and a number written in a hurried hand, R. Whitmore. There was a line underneath, "Call if you ever need help." The line was both warm and out of place. Outside, rain washed the street smooth and clean of small dramas, indifferent. Inside, a cashier bagged Robert's groceries with a reverence that felt too loud. The store resumed its ordinary rhythm, but the moment had left a small tremor in the air. As they left, a thin man in a dark coat paused near the door and watched Lily with an expression that did not belong to a stranger. He had a notebook tucked under his arm, and he made no attempt to hide a quick notation, a tiny tick like a tally. He was gone before anyone could name him. But Paul noticed. He saw the movement of pen on paper and the steady, controlled way the man watched Lily until she disappeared into the rain. Paul's mouth tightened. In the quiet that followed, he told himself he was imagining things. Lily walked home lighter by the size of the coin roll, but burdened by the secret of having given away what she could scarcely spare. It felt at once like courage and theft. At night, the two are sisters. When she opened the door to their flat, her mother looked up from the couch where she had been sitting under a blanket, reading the same line of a newspaper, because sleep had slid away. Lily's heart gave a small, private stutter of pride and fear. Later, when she smoothed the coins into the pill bottle for safekeeping, she found the scrap of paper in the bottom of her hand. The name R. Whitmore. The number looked like it had been written by someone who wanted to hurry away from his own kindness. Lily folded the paper and put it in her pocket, though she had no plan to call. If she was honest, she was not sure she trusted favors that came from beyond the line where her life began and his life ended. That night sleep played on the edges of her thoughts like a moth. The city outside their thin walls hummed with other stories, someone negotiating a sale, someone else arguing over a debt, a car idling in the rain. But under the steady drum, there was also the quiet sound of an unseen hand writing something down. There was an economy of observation afoot, people watching, counting, testing. The thin man with the notebook had been too deliberate to be merely curious. This is where the peace fractures. A small, brave kindness pulls at a thread that runs through other people's hands. Someone might see the coin roll on the counter as an act of generosity, someone else might call it bait. Beneath the ordinary, there began to gather a current that demanded a price. Only later would Lily understand the shape of that price. For now, she held the paper like a talisman and slept, tired and proud and ignorant of the little ledger that had just added a new line. The days after the grocery were a study in small movements. Lily moved through them like someone rearranging furniture in a house she did not own. Careful, purposeful, always measuring where things might break. At home, Grace Evans greeted her with a tired smile that hid a sharper thing, the ache of someone who knows what it means to ask and to be refused. Grace's cough had become part of the rhythm of the flat, a punctuation that made Lily hurry her steps and count her coins again. "Don't worry," Grace would say, though worry had become a second language in their rooms. She still braided Lily's hair, sometimes, not because she must, but because the old gestures were anchored in a world that shifted too fast. Paul worked his shifts with a steady patience, a man who had seen too many small tragedies to be surprised by them, but who still believed in polite rituals. He cleared shelves, stacked cans, pushed a broom when no one was watching. In the evenings, he sat with a cup of instant coffee and told jokes to fill the silence. He knew customers by their habits. Mrs. Klein bought too many sweets, Mr. Ortiz liked paprika, Lily bought the cheapest bread. When Robert Whitmore returned to the store the following week, Paul's greeting landed between friendliness and calculation. He watched the way Robert moved through the aisles, the way he picked brand names like a man choosing colors for a room only he could see. Robert, in his penthouse that watched the city like a king overlooks a kingdom, felt smaller than he had expected to after the card refusal. That small public humiliation clung to him like dust. He could not tell anyone. Pride held its own counsel. And so he carried a private anxiety that made him stare at the ledger of his life the way some people stare at their hands in a mirror. Beneath his smooth politeness, there were fissures. He practiced generosity. Now, as if it might reset something, he called the charity he had funded, shifted money between accounts, attended a gala with a brightness that felt slightly forced. In private, he replayed the grocery scene like a man reading a page he had missed. Why had machine failed? Was it a chance? Or had someone pried open a seam and peeked in? People forgive you for big mistakes if you make them small ones, usually, Robert told Malcolm, his driver and oldest acquaintance, over a late lunch. He pushed his plate of food back, as if the cheese wanted to cling to him. Show you're human. Show you care. His eyes, the color of lead, did not smile. Malcolm laughed, but it was a small sound. You've never had to improvise gratitude, sir. You've paid for it. He tapped the table lightly, as if testing the wood. Careful who you trust to keep your small things secret. Daniel Mercer lingered in the peripheries of both their lives. He came from a different world, clean-cut, observing a man who made lists in a neat hand and crossed things off with a kind of quiet pleasure. He attended community meetings for a foundation that Robert's company sponsored, and he took notes, not for show, but as if the notes were thread, and he was tracing how to knit something together. Daniel spoke softly to people and asked precise questions. To Lily, he offered a pamphlet about a youth program and a smile that felt practiced. If you ever want help with school, he said, call me. His card had the title Volunteer Coordinator printed on it. He watched. He listened. Lily found herself watching people in a new way. The scrap of paper had unlocked an odd curiosity that sat beside her better instincts. She imagined a future where bills did not pinch, where Grace's cough was a story they told at dinner instead of an alarm. She thought often about Robert's eyes when the card failed, how they flickered like a truth trying to hide. He looked like someone who could fix things, she told Paul once as he wrapped a bag. Her voice was small in the back room where boxes made shadows. Paul folded the bag slowly. Or someone who could break them, he said. He knew the city's currency of favors and debts. He had once worked at a place where men in suits promised futures and left people with less than before. He kept a memory of being on the losing side of a handshake. He watched Robert with a guarded curiosity, the kind that does not ask direct questions, but lets questions become quiet waits. In the evenings, Robert's assistant, Claire, tried to manage the edges of his life. She briefed him on meetings, reminded him of calls, smoothed over the tiny administrative disasters that threatened public appearances. Claire had been with him through scandals that were polite enough to be called misunderstandings. She had learned how to read the pauses in his sentences and how to hand him a smooth story when his own faltered. Yet even Claire felt something change in him, an urgency at odd hours, a list of names he avoided. Once, over coffee, she voiced a worry in a way that was more confession than complaint. Money's a tool, Robert, she said quietly, but sometimes tools tell you to do things. Robert looked at her and felt the old armor slide. I don't want to be the sort of man who is remembered only for paying, he said. I'd like to be remembered for fixing. He did not know. Then that fixing can demand more than money. Sometimes it demands revealing the very things you hide. Grace, for all her day-to-day fatigue, watched Lily with a fierce tenderness. She saw the way her daughter's shoulder twitched when someone mentioned charity, the way Lily's gaze lingered on men like Robert with a mixture of suspicion and hope. One evening, as rain tapped the window and the apartment smelled of boiled tea, she touched Lily's hand. Keep your heart, Grace said. Keep it close. People give with their hands that sometimes ask back. Lily nodded, but did not tell her mother about the scrap of paper. She could not explain why a number on a page made her feel both safer and exposed. Between them, small alliances formed. Paul would tell Lily when the store gave away extra bread. Claire would call in favors to expedite a charity application. Malcolm would tip a little extra into a hat. Each person moved as if smoothing a fabric that had a rip. Yet, under that patchwork of kindness, there were threads that might pull taut. Daniel's notes grew longer. Robert's unease turned toward action. Lily's courage walked on a blade. The city watched like a patient audience. Secrets are social things here. They travel by bus in grocery aisles, in the quiet tapping of a pen. And somewhere in the pause between generosity and expectation, a choice was waiting, one that would make some people grateful and others bitter. The texture of those choices would reveal who they were. The Whitmore Foundation's event smelled like new paint and coffee meant to be impressive. Banners with Robert Whitmore's face smiled down from poles, the logo caught light like a promise, and volunteers in matching shirts moved with tidy purpose. Daniel had called it a community evening, soft chairs, warm soup, a table for kids, and he had smiled at Lily in that precise way that made her feel chosen and small at the same time. She had gone because Claire's assistant at the office had slipped a note to Paul asking if Lily might come. Paul had told her it was harmless, a chance, and Lily had wanted to believe in chances. Inside the room, everything was arranged to look accidental. Photographers hovered with cameras that did not look like cameras. A volunteer nudged Lily toward a seat near the front, and Daniel took a clipboard like a man taking a mark off a list. "We'll put you in the speech," he said, and his voice was sugar. "Just a sentence. Tell them what you need." Lily's stomach folded at the idea of being watched. "Just a sentence." Daniel told her again, not unkindly, as if the words were a favor. When Robert arrived, the room softened. He moved through people with a practiced warmth, shaking hands, leaning in where a camera could see him. When he reached Lily, he paused, meeting her with eyes that looked tired and bright at once. He spoke to her like a man wishing he had known earlier. Someone clicked a photograph. The flash split the air like a small truth. Lily stood and read the sentence Daniel had helped her practice. "My mama needs medicine. I could not buy it." The microphone made her voice small and big. Applause followed, and the applause felt like something that belonged to everyone and no one. After the speeches, a woman from a press team guided Lily toward a table stacked with gift cards and an envelope stamped with Robert's name. "We'll be in touch," Daniel said, handing her a business card with neat letters, "Daniel Mercer, volunteer coordinator." On the way home, Lily folded the card into her pocket and wondered, in the quiet of the bus, if she had done the right thing. Her mother hugged her, like a trophy that had cost too much. They spread the leaflets on the table, and Grace read them until her eyes stung. "It was good," she said. "You were brave." Lily wanted to believe it had been only bravery and not a bargain she had unwittingly made. The bargain, for some, had been written long before Lily walked into the room. Claire, at her desk in the glass tower, watched live feeds from the event 3 floors below. She had organized many things for Robert: charity nights, press lines, photo ops. She knew how to tuck pity into a shot, so it looked natural. Tonight, a tray of emails blinked at her, approvals, schedules, and somewhere between a calendar invite and a catering bill she found a message she had not expected. An internal memo marked urgent. The subject line read, "Community outreach, target list, and contingencies." Claire's fingers hesitated before she opened it. Inside, the language was clinical: select beneficiaries for testimonial slots. Ensure authenticity by staging low-scale, plausible encounters. Operation: seamless narrative. Contingency: card incident to elicit genuine response. Capture spontaneous gratitude for PR materials. Underneath, in a separate paragraph, was a list of neighborhoods, times, and, like a needle winking in bright light, a small set of names, one of which was Evans Lily. Her coffee went cold. She scrolled until another document unfolded: an internal report on product distribution, Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, regional supply, cost-cutting measures, alternative sourcing for low-income lines. The sheet was thin with euphemism. There were margins and footnotes that pointed to withheld safety checks and shipments rerouted through third-party suppliers with cheaper ingredients. A line noted complaints from clinics that had been smoothed over. Minimal adverse events, manage public exposure. Claire felt a sound in her chest that was not solely a professional alarm. Memory tugged at her. The cough of a neighbor's child, the boxes of cheaper pills left in donation bins. She had known the easy lies that surround power, but this was a stitch that ran through the thing she helped make presentable. Behind the stage smiles at tonight's event, she read a ledger that looked like an apology owed and never given. She closed the laptop, and the world narrowed. Decisions had faces, and tonight, one of those faces had been a little girl's. Back at the community center, not everyone was easy with the staged applause. Outside, under an umbrella between two parked cars, the thin man from the grocery stood watching the exit. He had a recorder now, tucked inside his coat, and his notebook was thicker. He approached Claire as she came down the back stairs to catch fresh air, his voice soft but steady. "You run these things," he said, "not a question. You set the scenes." Claire's jaw tightened. "We're helping people," she said. It sounded like a defense and a plea all at once. He slid a folded sheet across to her, the same memo she had seen. "Do you know what your company has been cutting corners on?" he asked. "Pills, tests, supply lines. They call it efficiency. People call it injury." Claire's hands shook. For a moment, she saw every staged photograph replayed as evidence and not as charity. She thought of Lily's small voice and of Robert's tired eyes in the light of the flash. Betrayal does not always come shouting. Sometimes it arrives in the careful handwriting of policy. She felt suddenly that the kindness she had arranged might shield a cruelty she could not unclench. Inside, Daniel smiled too smoothly as he helped pack up leftover soup. He had been careful. He had checked names, cleared lists, delivered lines. His neat writing on his clipboard was a map of choices. And somewhere between the stage card incident and the applause, a thread had been pulled taut. The world had shifted. Kindness was not as simple as it looked, and someone or some system had been using small people's needs like props in a room made to look warm. Outside, amid the damp, Claire made a choice she had not yet named. The thin man watched as she folded the paper back in her pocket, and in that movement, the story turned. What had felt like a small, isolated mercy had the shape of something else, a cover, a plan, and a betrayal that would sit heavy in Lily's hands the moment its truth found her. The flat smelled of boiled tea, and something sharper now, a metallic edge that undercut even Grace's cough. The paracetamol Lily had bought the week before made her mother sleep in fits and sweat through the blanket. At first, Lily blamed tiredness, the thin mattress, and the gray weather. Then Grace woke one night with a tremor in her hands that was new, as if the pills had whispered a secret they were not supposed to keep. Lily stood over her mother with the small lamp casting a pool of yellow on the worn carpet. The coin roll in her pocket felt like a small heart beating. She thought of the scrap of paper with R. Whitmore's name and number folded inside it like a promise she was not sure she wanted to use. She thought of Daniel's smile at the event that had felt like an open door, and of the applause that had dissolved into the steady ache of living costs. Outside, the city bled light into the rain. Inside, choices stacked like plates that might break if handled too fast. Should she call the number? Should she risk something she could not return? Or should she keep counting coins and pretend the tremor would pass? Each option had a weight. Poverty is not only a lack of money, it is a series of decisions where every safe path is a compromise. At the store, Paul watched his customers with a sharper attention. Lily had not been herself at the counter lately. He had offered extra bread once. She had refused with a small smile that did not reach her eyes. He had seen the way she stared at packets of low-cost pills and then pushed them away. "You know you can say if you need help," he told her one afternoon, voice low, as if they shared a joke the world did not understand. She wanted to be honest. She wanted to tell him about the tremor, the way Grace slept like someone with a secret. But honesty in that room could be a kind of nakedness. People hear what they expect to hear. Paul's eyes gave her a small, steady kindness instead. "If you're thinking about calling that number, think," he said. "People with money, they do things the rest of us don't plan for." Claire's life became a tense wire. She could not unsee the memo. When Jonathan Price, the thin man from the grocery, had approached her with the paper, she thought first of her career, then of Lily's small smile under the stage lights, and then of the cough of a woman in a flat no one remembered until they needed a photograph. The company's PR machine hummed like a living thing. It could learn to bite back. Malcolm called Claire once that week, his voice measured but sharp. "You're close to a line, Claire. Don't step over it." He did not say why he warned her, but the undertone was clear. Loyalty was a currency too. Claire decided to act in the narrow hours before dawn. She printed copies of the memo, the supply reports, anything that smelled like truth, and slid them into a folder. She thought of handing them to Jonathan. She thought, too, of how Robert had once handed her a cigarette in an empty car park and said, without anger, "We do good here." Those words were now a question mark. Her assistant inbox pinged with requests, a live interview, a donation match. Each ping felt like a small trap sprung at her feet. Daniel watched from a distance that was not quite far enough. His neat lists had become more complicated as names like Evans Lily translated from a box on a spreadsheet into a child who had cried on a microphone. He believed deeply in outcomes that could be measured. People served, numbers on a dashboard. Yet, even his belief had a limit when he learned the supply lines were thinner than the report said. He chose the solution his hands knew best, smoothing. He arranged a meeting with Lily at the community center under the guise of program follow-up. He wanted to offer a scholarship, a gift card, and a door. He wanted to be the man who fixed it. But when he reached for his script, guilt found him in the fold. The scripted kindness felt suddenly like glue on a wound. Lily came to the meeting because she needed help, and because the alternative was to wait in a flat, watching her mother's breathing. Daniel talked gently. He brought a folder full of forms and the precise look of someone who could imagine benevolence as a checkbox. "We can help with medical costs," he said. "Whitmore Foundation will cover it." There was relief in Lily's face like rain in summer. But while Lily signed papers and practiced hope, Jonathan Price published a short piece online with the memo attached. It was sharp and clean, a blade of words that cut the glossy reputation Robert had curated. The article accused Whitmore Pharmaceuticals of cost-cutting that endangered patients and used charity events to manage the optics. It named neighborhoods and hinted at manufactured moments, the card incident among them. The piece did not finger anyone by name beyond the company, but the implication landed like a small bomb. The reaction was immediate. Claire received messages in the night, threats disguised as corporate counsel emails, and hurried calls asking whether the material could be traced. Malcolm met Jonathan outside a coffee shop with a smile like a poker face. "You're playing with fire," he told him. "This will hurt people." Jonathan's answer was a simple, steady line. "It will protect them. Someone has to speak." For Lily, it felt like the world had tilted afresh. Help was suddenly more complicated. Daniel's offer could be genuine. It could be a way to soothe the noise. The paper in her pocket felt hot, like a brand that might make other hands reach for her. Paul worried aloud to Claire one evening. "If the pills are bad and someone traces the donation, families get caught between gratitude and truth," he said. "Where does that leave a girl like Lily?" Grace's tremor worsened. The cheap batch of pills, it seemed, had a side effect not listed on the leaflet. Her breathing came through short bursts now, and once in the night, she woke and whispered the name of a street she once dreamed of as a girl, a place she had never been. Lily sat with her and felt an anger flare inside her, small and sharp and hot. The person who had the power to stop this was the man whose number folded in her pocket. Calling him felt like stepping onto a stage again. It might bring help. It might bring a deeper manipulation that would cost them more than money. The city watched the story unfurl like a map of thin lines. Each person tied a knot in their conscience. Claire folded her hands and decided she would not let the company bury the truth. Jonathan would get the documents he needed. Daniel, pressed by the push of exposure, stepped in with an earnest face and an offer to manage the fallout, to provide immediate aid in exchange for cooperation. Malcolm moved like a shadow between Claire and Robert, urging silence. And Lily, above all, faced the narrowest path. Accept help and risk being a pawn in a larger game, or refuse and watch the woman who raised her with her under a system that called itself benevolent. There are moments when time feels thin as paper. Lily's next breath was one of them. She looked at Grace, at the trembling hand, at the number in her pocket, and felt the city's judgment like a cold light. Choices do not come with instructions. They come with consequences. The hall smelled of polished wood and nerves. Chandeliers held the ceiling like captive constellations. Light fell in precise, flattering pools. Outside, the rain had turned into a steady drum, a rhythm that echoed the quickened breathing in the room. Cameras lined the front row, as if the floor itself had been wired for truth. I watched them all come together, Lily standing near the back with Paul, Grace in a folding chair still wrapped in a cardigan that smelled faintly of boiled tea, Claire at a table with a folder that felt heavier than paper. The evening had been billed as reassurance, a follow-up to show the charity worked, to reassure donors and families. Robert walked in like someone trying to make peace with his reflection. He had the careful smile of a man who practiced generosity in mirrors. Tonight, the practice faced an unscripted moment. Daniel stood close to the stage, clipboard tucked like a talisman, voice smooth and ready whenever a camera found him. Malcolm hovered nearby, a shadow whose loyalty could bend any way necessity demanded. I tell it now as both witness and observer. The room breathed differently when Claire stood. She had rehearsed this in the small hours, spoken to herself in the glow of a laptop, and folded courage into her palms like a paper boat. She rose during a Q&A meant for platitudes and, without flourish, placed the folder on the podium. The sound the folder made when it landed was a small bell. Cameras leaned in. She did not shout. She did not smear drama across the walls. She opened the folder and slid the memo across the microphone to the nearest reporter. The page trembled in the light. "This is the document," she said, voice even and breaking at the edges. It outlines stage testimonies, cut corners in production, and contingency plans that used vulnerable people as props. Her eyes found Lily, and she did not look away. "I helped dress the scene," she said. "I am sorry." There was a sound like paper folding in a storm. Daniel moved first. He stepped forward with the aggressive politeness of someone who had practiced interruption. "Claire, this is reckless," he said. "You're accusing good work with words," Claire said. "I am giving you words backed by numbers." She tapped the supply report. The camera caught the footnotes that named batches, alternate suppliers, and a string of suppressed incident reports. A reporter lifted a phone and began to livestream. That is when Daniel's face changed. The neatness of his lists cracked into something sharper. He called out, not just as a man defending a program, but as someone trying to redirect attention. "These are allegations. We will investigate. We will." His voice faltered as the live stream's viewer count climbed like a tide. Then Grace swayed. It was small at first, a hand to her chest, a quick intake of breath. Lily saw it and went to her immediately, the room narrowing to the small map between a mother and her daughter. Her fingers found Grace's wrist and felt the thin, fast pulse. Panic rose in the room like a smell. Someone shouted for water. Security moved toward the stage as if they could cordon off consequence. "Call an ambulance," Paul yelled. The word cut through the hum. In the bright, clinical light that arrived soon after, paramedics worked with calm, efficient mouths. The siren outside answered like an oath. Claire knelt beside Lily and held her hand as if she might anchor the world. In the ambulance, under the humming lights and the smell of antiseptic, truths kept falling like slow rain. The paramedic's tablet read the symptoms and the list of recent medications. The cheap batch flagged as a possible culprit. The hospital would run tests. The hospital would call investigators. The live stream held the room like a lens. Millions could watch the unfolding evidence of what corporate words had done to ordinary lungs. Back in the hall, cameras replayed Claire's admission. Daniel tried to salvage control by calling legal, by telling Robert that the leak must be contained. But legal lines are blurred when evidence sits on a stage and a woman's breath is caught on a machine. Jonathan's piece, the memo, Claire's folder, they became threads of a single rope. Someone pulled, and the knot unraveled. In the hours that followed, the confrontation sharpened into confession. Under pressure, live interviews, the slowly incinerating trust of donors, documents were traced. An internal procurement list bore Daniel's initials in the margins. Emails between a mid-level executive and Daniel traced discussions of alternative suppliers and acceptable risk. Malcolm, when he could not protect movement with deferential silence, stepped aside with a slow, regretful nod. The company line hardened and then split. One side insisted on process, the other side began to admit failure. Robert stood before microphones the next morning with rain still drying on his shoulders. He spoke like a man who had been taught to pronounce absolution. "We failed," he said, and the words hit like a stone thrown into water. He laid out measures: recall of the problematic batch, review of procurement compensation funds for affected families, and independent investigation. His voice did not ring with the easy certainty it once had. He did not start with denial. He tried, clumsily and humanly, to make amends. But confession is not the same as absolution. The betrayal that burned brightest was not merely profit over safety, it was the clinical use of people's suffering as material for image-making. Daniel's ambition had mapped a path that used vulnerability for optics. He was escorted from his office. Legal summonses would follow. Claire resigned and disappeared into work with a watchdog group. She would not be satisfied by press releases. Malcolm left his post, unable to reconcile loyalty with watching harm. Jonathan continued to write, his pen steady. For Lily and Grace, the aftermath was not tidy. Grace's recovery was slow. The cheap pills had left a scar in the body's quiet machinery. But the recall meant new medicine arrived, and a fund was set up in Grace's name to cover care. Robert's promises began to turn into action. Clinics were audited, suppliers were fired, contracts rewritten. Claire worked with Jonathan to form a community oversight panel. Daniel faced hearings. The company's name would not be made clean that week or the next. Reputation is a heavy thing to mend. In the quiet after the storm, I watched Lily on the hospital bench, her fingers tracing the edge of a scrap of paper with R. Whitmore's number. She is no longer simply the girl who offers coins. She is the girl who refused to be a prop. She walked into that hall wanting medicine for her mother and walked out with something harder. The knowledge that help must be asked for and demanded on terms that protect dignity. Between Claire's confession, Daniel's fall, and Robert's awkward, too-late penance, the moral remains jagged. Power will always find ways to dress itself in good deeds. The story's wound does not disappear with apologies or recalls, but there is a moment when people choose not to be used. That choice, small and bright, changes the ledger. Lily learned it. Her mother learned it. A few others learned it too. For some, the lesson is painful and costly. For others, it is a quiet redemption, not neat, not final, but honest enough to begin again. The days after the storm moved like slow weather. Rain still lingered in the gutters and on windowsills, but inside small rooms, people began to sort what remained. Grace's cough softened into a quieter sound as new medicine reached the flat and the hospital discharge papers were folded into the drawer where Bills used to live. The coin roll Lily kept in her pocket no longer felt like a single thin lifeline. It felt, oddly, like a map of choices she had made and would make again. I watch Lily as she learns to name the weight she carried. She goes to the oversight meetings Claire helped form, sitting in the back at first, then offering a voice that has learned the shape of being heard without being paraded. When she speaks, it is simple and steady. We want to help. We did not want our faces to be used. The room listens. People who once clapped for her now listen because she has asked them to, and the difference is like daylight. Paul brings extra bread sometimes, now with less pity and more respect. Jonathan writes pieces that push for law as well as exposure. Malcolm finds work with a local welfare group, moving quietly so that his loyalty has a place that does not ask for silence. Robert's life was reshaped in blunt ways. The board demanded answers, shareholders wanted distance. He faced questions that were not polite press lines. He agreed to the launch of an independent review and the creation of a community advisory panel that had teeth, real oversight, and power to veto suppliers and review contracts. He met with families in small rooms, not stage halls, and listened. He spoke less and tried to do more. Some of his gestures were clumsy at first, a check that looked like a broadcast, but over time his actions began to match his words in ways that could be measured. Funds dispersed, directly to clinics, procurement transparently audited, suppliers vetted in public. Forgiveness did not come all at once. For many, it never would. But there was repair where there had been only spin. Daniel faced hearings. His precise lists were read out in stark font. He could argue intent, complexity, the pressure of targets, but the ledger of consequences wrote itself in patient testimony. A woman in a hospital bed, a mother who could not afford medicine, a child who had been handed a microphone before she was handed enough truth to stand on. Daniel's fall was not theatrical, it was bureaucratic and consequential. He lost his position. He lost the neat scaffolding of his ambition. In private, the man who once crossed things off with pleasure sat with his own list and found many items unchecked. Claire slipped out of the corporate glow and into watchdog rooms. She became awkwardly good at the work of repair, listening, drafting policy, sitting in long meetings where language was careful and sometimes painful. She kept the folder that had started the unraveling at the top of a drawer and sometimes took it out to remind herself why she had risked career for conscience. Jonathan and Claire worked together on the advisory panel, their partnership a small, steady light. It did not erase the harm, but it turned a raw wound into an instrument for change. For Lily, the moral questions settled like dust that she had to sweep each morning. She had given money away in a grocery and started a chain of events no child should be expected to weigh. She had stood under the lights and read the sentence that asked for help, and later she had learned that those lights could be arranged to look like mercy. In the quiet of evenings, she turned a scrap of paper with R. Whitmore's number and felt both gratitude and wariness. The number had opened a door, but it had also been a key to a room that others used to stage pity. How do you know when a favor is kindness and when it is a trade? She asked Claire once, the question shaped by the slow work of recovery. Claire's answer was not easy. You look at who keeps the record, she said. If the ledger is written in people's names and not impressions, it is closer to kindness. It was not a clean rule, only a direction. Lily learned to help in ways that kept dignity by asking for receipts for donations that went to clinics, by insisting on privacy for those who did not want their faces in press kits, by choosing when to speak and when to let others speak for themselves. She learned, too, that courage is not heroic only when it is visible. It is also the daily decision to protect someone's story from being reshaped. Her mother's breath evened out by degrees, and with that steadying came something like forgiveness, not just toward those who had harmed them, but toward the small, necessary compromises they had made to survive. In the end, the ledger changed shape, power had been forced to open its books, and the city learned that charity without accountability is a thin garment that will not shelter the vulnerable. People like Robert could be made to answer. People like Daniel could be exposed. People like Claire could turn guilt into action. But the deepest shift was quieter. A community that had once learned to accept spectacle as help started to demand honest aid. That demand was messy and slow, but it was real. Lily folded the scrap of paper one last time and put it in the drawer where Grace's medicines were kept. Outside, rain slid off the eaves in thin, clean threads. She stood on the threshold of their flat and felt both small and enormous. Small, because she was still 12 and still counted coins. Enormous, because she had learned to count differently. The world had offered her bargains and betrayals. She had taken some and refused others. She had traded silence for a word, dignity. I leave her there, in the light that comes after heavy rain, holding a choice that will keep returning. The story is not tidy. The city keeps its hard edges. But between the shards, there are enough pieces to build a table where people can sit and tell true stories. That perhaps is the kind of repair that lasts. So, tell me, if you were in his shoes, mocked and underestimated, would you have revealed your success or walked away in silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that flip the script on arrogance.